Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm in here shooting a couple of back-to-back videos, so this background may look very similar to another recent video you just saw. So in this video I'm talking about oxygen absorbers. I get questions about oxygen absorbers all the time, and I wanted to cover a few different things. Now you can see right here that these oxygen absorbers are vacuum sealed into this jar. Now when I got these, I opened up the pack, threw one into the Mylar bag with the white cheddar cheese in it, and then quickly took the rest and packed them tightly into this jar. I chose the smallest jar I could, fit them in, and then vacuum sealed it, and I worked quickly. Now technically this should have worked. I've done this before though with other oxygen absorbers years ago, and the same thing happened. I did it quickly, vacuum sealed it up, and then when I opened it to go use them in something else, they were no good. Same thing happened this time. Now when I did that video on the Mylar bags, a lot of people were saying that they used their Food Saver to vacuum seal theirs into Food Saver bags. Did that one time too, same problem. Or that they did it like I did here. They said it always works for them, which I would think it should. And this jar is sealed, and the jar was sealed when I went to use it. So there was no reason for it to be bad. Now, I don't know if it's maybe the oxygen absorbers. I assume the ones I got the one time, the reason I figured they were just a bad batch is what I figured I'd got. But I know these ones were good because the one I had used right away worked. It did the job it was supposed to do, and I know how quickly I worked, and I made sure the jar was well sealed. In fact, I actually sealed it in that video, but I cut that whole part out when I thought, well, that's not going to work. I don't want to tell people to vacuum seal their oxygen absorbers into jars and expect them to still be good later. But then, like I said, a lot of people commented on it and said that's what they did, and it's always worked for them. So I don't know why I've had issues. It could be all kinds of variables, from maybe it's not really the oxygen absorbers, maybe this time around it's actually the Mylar bags. Maybe the Mylar bags are cheap. And here's my thing. You know, I did that video on the Mylar bags and the oxygen absorbers because yes, I do sometimes use that stuff, and I thought it would be a good idea to have some other options with the shortages of jars and stuff, but honestly I'm not liking it. I'm really, other than using the Mylar bags inside of buckets, I personally prefer to not do any of them. Now when people see my vacuum sealed jars, they always ask, do you add an oxygen absorber? Now some people choose to do so, and you can do that if you want. Personally, I have never found a need for it, because when you're vacuum sealing your jar, you're removing most of the air from the jar. Now, some people's argument will say, well, you're not removing all the oxygen. All I know is that vacuum sealing into jars, let's say these snow peas from 2019, you can hear just by me shaking them that they are still crisp. Or what about this zucchini I just vacuum sealed up from 2020? Now one thing I know, well, snow peas tend to stay crunchy for a while. A lot of this stuff, if you don't reseal it, it'll get stale. So that tells me that the vacuum sealing is doing exactly what it should do. And it's also, if people are concerned about bugs or whatever in there, when you vacuum seal in there, you're removing most of that air, if not all of the air, and you're removing most of the oxygen, and if there's anything in there, it's not going to survive for long, because there's only going to be so much oxygen left in the jar, if any, once you vacuum seal. And I'm talking about whether it be you're using these chambers here that Patrick made, or you made your own and you did this, or you're using your brake bleeder pump with your Food Saver tops, or you're using your Food Saver machine with the Food Saver tops to vacuum seal your jars. No matter how you do it, as long as your jar is sealed, there should be no need for an oxygen absorber. Now again, I realize some people still like the idea of throwing that in there, and they have their different arguments, and that's fine. All I can tell you is from my own experience from vacuum sealing foods of many kinds into jars, I have never needed to waste my money or time on the oxygen absorber. If you've been watching me for any length of time, you know that I have tons of foods vacuum sealed into jars. And now that we have the chamber, I'm able to recycle the green olive jars and start vacuum seal my nuts and different things into these. That way I can still conserve some of my canning jars for canning. Some of this has been vacuum sealed, like this jerky that I made back in 2016. It's been vacuum sealed in this jar, still good. Been in there for that long, 4 years, vacuum sealed into this jar, nothing growing in there. The pumpkin seeds that I did last year, still good. I actually opened them up and tried them and then resealed them up just to make sure. The sunflower seeds, this one actually, even though it's a Tatler lid, it actually stayed sealed. I have some that didn't. And the sunflower seeds got a little more stale, but they're not rancid. Calendula, ground beef, coconut, hemp seeds, no matter what it was, anything that stayed sealed stayed fresh. Even after many years of sitting on the shelf without an oxygen absorber, as long as it holds its seal, it's not a problem. Now, one of the things that people say the reason they like to add an oxygen absorber is in case they vacuum seal it and it comes unsealed, then the oxygen absorber will remove that oxygen and cause the jar to reseal. That can happen. So people who are unable to vacuum seal their jars, then your oxygen absorber may be the way to go. Now you can try this method here. Just start with a small pack, like a pack of 10. Because the last ones I got, like these ones too, I think it was 10 per pack. It came with the Mylar bags that I ordered. And unlike the ones I bought years ago, that it was just a whole bunch of them thrown into one bag. And it's like, what do you do with all these once you open them up? But anyway, I would start with just one and then see how that works for you. Work quickly, get them in there, vacuum seal it fast as you can. And then when you go to try them again, see if it works for you. So that way you're not throwing away a whole bunch at once. You're just experimenting. Now you can buy the individually wrapped ones, but the only ones I could find that were actually that way were the bigger ones that you would want to put in at least your 5-gallon buckets and bigger. If you're talking for jars, you don't need them that big. And so you're paying more money for something when you don't need it that big. If you're talking about putting it in jars, I'd say go with this size or smaller. I don't remember what size this is, but they're whatever size came with those bags. So oxygen absorbers come in many different sizes. And you can, I'll see if I can find a chart that I can link to in the description box down below that shows you what size you need to put in your different size things. And even if you only have like a bunch of smaller ones like this, instead of having the real big ones you want to put in a bucket, then you can throw in as many of the smaller ones as you need to get up to the right CC to use in your bigger buckets. And that's usually you're considering a Mylar bag inside of a bucket. And that's, that's supposed to be the very, very best way to do it. And I've done that with some stuff, but I've honestly, over the years, have not found them to do any better than grains that I've just put in a bucket and then just close the bucket up tight. So anyway, you got to spend your money wisely. Some people can't afford to buy all this extra stuff. Now, some people will say, well, you get what you pay for. Okay, I get that. But when I first started getting into food storage, all we had were buckets, and the only reason we had those was because we either had recycled them from the laundry soap we used to buy many years ago from Costco, or we got them from Pat's work, and he was able to get those, like I mentioned in that video I did on buckets, which I'll also link to down below. He was able to get those really big buckets, and a lot of times I just stuck the stuff in there, either in the bag they came in or even just in a big plastic bag, just to have something to put in there. And I didn't use oxygen absorbers. I didn't use the Mylar back then because I couldn't see investing in that for the time. Yet even then, my grains, my flours, all of that stuff that I'd been doing, I'd been keeping it out in the shop, which is not even climate controlled. It gets hot, it gets cold, it gets hot, it gets cold, and it can be kind of damp in there sometimes. And even then, my items within the buckets, without all that fancy schmancy stuff, stayed perfectly fine. The only time I ever had some grains go bad on me were the ones that, because I was out of buckets, I had put in a plastic tote, one of those boxes that flip over, thinking they'd be safe enough in there, safe enough from the rats and the mice and so on, which it was. However, we got a leak. in the roof, and it just so happened that leak was coming straight down on top of that box and running in through where the flap was and got the bag of quinoa wet, and of course it all molded before I realized what was even going on. That's the only time I've ever had grains go bad for lack of proper storage, and it was just because I didn't have any more buckets at that time. A lot of people are having issues trying to find either Mylar bags or jars or even buckets. And so you got to do the best you can. So the main thing you got to look at is don't worry yourself too much about getting oxygen absorbers, Mylar bags. Just find something that you can close up tightly, even if you can't vacuum seal it. Let's say, for example, this calendula, even though it's vacuum sealed, a lot of your herbs and various things can stay just fine as long as you put the lid on tightly. I still recommend vacuum sealing most of all your other goods. If you have a way to do that, again, we're now making and selling the chambers because people are having a heck of a time finding the food saver tops for vacuum sealing the jars. And I'm really liking this because I can seal all the kinds of different jars in this one. The best thing you can do is try to keep your things in a cool, dry place and as tightly sealed as you can. And really, that should do well for most of your things. Again, as I said in that video where I was talking about the high fats, a lot of it also may have to do with your climate and whether or not you have a good place where you can store things where they'll keep cooler. So if you live in a very hot and humid climate, you might have more problems, but I still think you can find a closet or under bed space that tends to stay cooler and darker anyway, that you can still store a lot of your stuff. I don't think anything's totally hopeless. I think we can all find ways that will work for us and just keep learning and gleaning information from people who've had the experience. Now me, I don't like working with Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers that much, so I don't have as much experience as someone else over here, but I have a lot of experience with canning and sealing foods into jars and have had no issues. And also remember, there are many foods out there you do not even need to vacuum seal and are going to be just fine in whatever container they came in, like your coffee beans, your pastas, and your salts and sugars and stuff like that. You shouldn't have to worry about those. You should be able to just store them, unless if it's in a bag, you will. If you have problems with mice and rats, those are the things you have to watch through because they can chew through plastic. Any kind of thin plastic, like a real thin plastic container or your plastic bag. So if you have problems with mice and rats, those aren't, or your Mylar, they can chew through that too. So it'd be better to have, if you're doing Mylar, it is still best to put it down inside of a bucket to keep it safe from vermin like that. So there's just so many different variables depending on what it is you're storing and where you're storing it. But again, oxygen absorbers for the most part are not something I like to depend on. I would prefer to not ever have to use them at all. That's just my personal choice. Oh yes, and by the way, Tyler Woods called us the other day, and I have heard of this before. There are ways you can even make your own oxygen absorbers because the price of them is going up as well. And I think it involves steel wool and something else. So you might want to do a little hunting around on YouTube and online and see if you can find a good way to make your own oxygen absorbers. Just personally, not for me. I'm just not even going to hassle with it anymore. I'm just done with them. But anyone who wants to give us any more feedback on what oxygen absorbers they use, what size and all that, go ahead and put your comments down below and how you use them and what you use them for. As I keep saying, find what works best for you and realize that any of the information I share on my food storage is based mostly off my own experiences and what works for me. It might not be the best for you, but hopefully what it will do is get you headed in the right direction so you can do a little more searching and hunting and finding maybe people who are more experienced at dealing with oxygen absorbers and Mylar bags than I am that can give you better information as far as that goes. All right, well, go ahead and share your experiences with us down below. What is your favorite way to store your different foods, whether they be grains or nuts or whatever it is, and where do you store it? What is your best way to try to keep things climate controlled? Whatever it is, any helpful tips and information you can put down below. It's always great to have a lot of community feedback because we all can learn from each other that way. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care. and God bless.